Today we are going to talk about Monday Night Football. Not the game, but the broadcast. And all that's coming up after the bumper.
What do you mean you don't subscribe to my son's YouTube channel?
Mama, no!
Just snap the damn ball, RJ.
What's up, kinfolk? It's RJ Young. I am not on a step mill. Consider hitting the like and subscribe button because I upload a video every single day. It's always OU related, college football related, sports related. We have a good time. And today, we're going to talk about Monday Night Football. And not the game, the broadcast. I get the New Orleans Saints and the Carolina Panthers are playing a game that has playoff implications. But most games this weekend had playoff implications as most teams were still in the hunt. Even the Cleveland Browns, which I think is having a large degree to do with Baker Mayfield. See the video I made about them winning against the Denver Broncos over the weekend. But the reason I wanted to talk about Monday Night Football is because I, like you, watch Monday Night Football, and I, like you, have not been enthused with the broadcast, in particular, the broadcast booth. Now, I'm a fight fan, right? Because I grew up fighting. Fight Me is not just the name of a show that I do. It is also just kind of how I go through life. I have tattoos all over me, like something like 18 or 20 something now. But a couple of them have to do with Sparta. Others have to do with Greek mythology. I have Molin Labe written on my forearms because that's how I get down. I got Invictus written on my forearms because that's how I get down. And I bring that up to say I watched a lot of boxing, right? And I watched a lot of ESPN boxing, especially really early in the day back when Floyd Mayweather Jr. was still fighting on ESPN. And also got to know guys like Joe Tessitore. Now, between Joe Tessitore and Teddy Atlas, you're talking about my favorite boxing broadcast booth of all time. Seriously, like you put Jim Lampley next to anybody and you're going to have a good time. But you put Joe Tessitore and Teddy Atlas next to each other on Friday night fights, and all of a sudden you've got RJ there all night if you want him, because Teddy was great with the analysis and he was always just going to tell you what he felt and how he felt about these two fighters, and nobody knew boxing better than him when you're talking about color commentary. But Joe Tessitore is there for it. The man's big booming voice, his charisma, his joy for the sport was infectious. Matter of fact, the only thing that I think is comparable to him is Gus Johnson and how Gus Johnson does basketball and lately college football. I know for a lot of folks, in particular OU fans, that Joel Klatt and Gus Johnson are the favorites for any college football game that could be called. Matter of fact, when they throw it to ESPN or ESPN picks up a broadcast or ABC picks up a broadcast, we're always just kind of holding our faces because we don't really like to hear whoever it is calling the game, because Joel Klatt does such a great job as an analyst and Gus Johnson is just there with fire and brimstone every time there's a big play. Same can be said about Joe Tessitore. So when Joe Tessitore was announced as the lead play-by-play guy for ESPN's Monday Night Football, I was overjoyed by that, because you're talking about a guy that I already have a great affinity for, that I would listen to read me the phone book because he's having such a great time. And because I'm something like a broadcaster, because I got a YouTube channel and people watch it, I pay attention to his mannerisms. I pay attention to how he calls games. I actually have a secret dream. Well, I guess it's not so secret anymore, that I would like to call a college football game as an analyst, not as a play-by-play guy, because I just don't think that's my bent. But you get what I'm saying here. I really enjoy listening to the broadcast, and I read the behind-the-scenes stories on places like The Athletic and whoever else has a long-form piece about what's going on Monday Night Football, and you're always going to get 1 to 2 trend pieces about the booth throughout the year. Now, I read the one in The Athletic that dropped today, that being Monday, before the game, where they basically followed around the 3-man broadcast booth and had some interesting things to say about it. Now, I don't like the 3-man broadcast booth. I just think that it's too many people, it's too many voices, and you've got one more analyst than you actually need, and you're actually getting in the way of the guy who's calling the game, who's doing a really great job in Joe Tessitore, and they try to tee up guys for their commentary. Now, even if it was a good 3-man booth, and it rarely is, Jason Witten and Booger McFarland with Joe Tessitore just ain't getting it done for me. And I think most people would feel that way about Jason Witten because he has all these Yogi Berra things to say about the game, like you can't keep kicking yourself in the foot. Say, huh? Like, watch them pull a rabbit out of their head. I mean, yes, as a person who talks and is a talking head, I understand sometimes you trip over your words, sometimes you mix your metaphors, sometimes things just don't come out the way that you want them to come out. But the thing about Jason Witten and Booger McFarland is that they're learning on the job in front of one of the largest audiences in sports every week. And they're also up against a Sunday night NFL broadcast which is pretty awesome. And I don't necessarily just mean that Al Michaels and Chris Collinsworth are good at their jobs, though Chris Collinsworth and Joel Klatt and their recall and their ability to diagnose what happens on a play from the line of scrimmage to the secondary and pick up penalties just before they're called is unmatched. I am in awe of that ability because I'm watching the game like they're watching the game, and I'm like, wow, I didn't see that hold. I didn't see that penalty. How did they see that? They're seeing everything all at once. And coupled with Al Michaels, Chris Collinsworth is great. And like I said, coupled with Gus Johnson, Joel Klatt is great. And I think a lot of that has to do with the three-man booth along with the sideline reporter. But now you got four voices, including Lisa Salters for the Monday Night Football broadcast, for guys that aren't used to being on national television like that. Now you got a guy like Booger McFarland, who is used to being on TV, but not like this, because you're talking about a guy who has an affinity for the SEC and LSU, talking about your Monday Night Football game, and that's not necessarily what most people want to hear. And then Jason Witten just hasn't had the reps. No matter what you think about the greatest tight end to ever wear a Dallas Cowboys uniform,
Fight me.
we all know that it's kind of like him and Booger are just kind of clashing all the time. And then reading the Athletics story, the headline of this video, there's an ESPN producer for Monday Night Football that thinks that Booger McFarland is the Charles Barkley of football. Nah, man. Number one, that sends two different narratives that I don't think that you want to put out there, which is to say you're trying to recreate inside the NBA on TNT, and you just ain't going to be able to do that without the reps. And one of the reasons that studio show is so good is because Ernie is allowed to just reel those guys in, and because Charles was about to fight Ernie real early on. It was must-see television because the guys that were talking about the NBA game were way more interesting than the NBA game itself, one of them being Chuck. Now, Chuck also is himself full blast all the time. Booger McFarland seems like a guy who's just trying to figure out how to be country on television. And I don't have anything against being country on television. I have something against not necessarily being your authentic self on television and how you try to portray that. And the thing about this Monday Night Football broadcast is they're just not good with all the toys that they have to work with. The Booger Mobile just gets on people's nerves, to say nothing of the people who paid hundreds of dollars to watch the game and see Booger McFarland on a crane rolling in front of them. That's not what they want. And for those of us that are watching the Monday Night Football broadcast, for which you have to have a cable subscription, you're not really interested in hearing Jason Witten fumble over his words and then contradict himself later in the broadcast by saying things like, you gotta establish the run, and then later saying, you can't get bogged down trying to establish the run. It's just a problem. And it will get solved, I think, with time. And all signs point to ESPN continuing to go with this three-man booth with Lisa Salters on the sideline. But they're going to have to figure something out in 2019 because this can't keep up. Because, one, Twitter, as we know, has a lot to say about everything, just like YouTube commenters do. And two, you can't operate this Monday Night Football program like the internet doesn't exist. You can't keep going on like you're going to ignore what the majority of people have to say. I know that there is a fine line between doing what you know how to do and also listening to the naysayers and the negativity, but also you have to take into account there are people who have a vested interest in this broadcast being good, and not all of them work at ESPN. A lot of them are football fans like myself, like you, who want a good NFL product and want Monday Night Football to go back to being must-see television, not because the game is so good, although that Rams-Chiefs game was awesome, but because you can be sure that the broadcast itself and your booth is going to be the best in football, because that is what the standard is from Monday Night Football broadcast. All right, that's it for me. Deuces.